Hi there, and welcome to the Main Idea Podcast. I don't know about you, but I didn't enter the field of education just to teach kids about the quadratic equation and how to write an essay about A Midsummer Night's Dream, although I did both of those things when I taught. I wanted to make a difference. I saw education as having the potential to be the great equalizer by providing students with real-life opportunities so that they could grab onto those opportunities and open doors and change the trajectory of their lives. And I was also hoping to raise the next generation of young adults and citizens who would make this world a better place to live in. So that's why I was so excited to come across the book, Educating for Justice, School-Wide Strategies to Prepare Students to Recognize, Analyze, and Challenge Inequity. There have always been individuals in schools who see their role as raising young people to move society in the direction of equity and justice. But what I love about this book is it provides a framework for an entire school to move together with this goal. And since this podcast is primarily for school and district leaders, how fortunate is it that you as the leader are uniquely positioned to bring together your students, your families, your staff to prepare students to see it as their role to work toward justice. I am Jen David Lang, and my passion is helping school leaders learn. I read lots of education and leadership books, and I save you time by sharing only the most compelling and impactful books with you. And yes, today we're going to discuss Educating for Justice, School-Wide Strategies to Prepare Students to Recognize, Analyze, and Challenge Inequity. I am fortunate to have all three authors here today, so let me introduce them to you briefly. Julia Bott is the Chief of Academics and Teaching and Learning at a public charter district in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Over the last 2 decades, Julia has also worked as an early childhood teacher, assistant principal, district leader, and principal. Welcome, Julia. Scott is a psychology professor at Boston College. He's a former secondary teacher in the Boston and Westwood Public Schools, and he is the co-author and author of numerous articles and books like the one we're talking about today about the role schools can play in supporting students' civic development and critical consciousness. And finally, Aaliyah El-Amin is a lecturer at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where her research and teaching focus on Black liberatory education, the development of critical consciousness, and critical pedagogy in schools. She is a former 4th and 5th grade teacher and elementary school instructional specialist. So Julia, Scott, Aaliyah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Great to have you. So let's dive right into your book. The basic question, why did you write this book? Why now?
Great. Well, Jen, first of all, thank you so much for having us. We're so thrilled to have the chance to talk with you and your audience about our work. And so in terms of where the book came from, I guess I would say that so Aaliyah and I, who have been working together for over a decade, have focused for many years now on this question of how schools can play a role in supporting young people's ability to recognize, analyze, and challenge injustice. And I think that as we get into the conversation, we'll talk more and more about why we think that's an important, those are important qualities and skills for young people to have, both for their own individual thriving and for the communities that they live in the society that we all live in. But a number of years ago, Aaliyah and I and a couple other collaborators, including Darren Graves, were working on a project that resulted in a book where we sort of offered these profiles of different schools that were teaching kids about injustice in different ways. Like when we sort of wrote about these 5 different schools that took different approaches to teaching kids to recognize, analyze, and challenge injustice, but did it in very different ways. And that book went out into the world. And over the next couple of years, as we talked about the book, a question that we started getting from school leaders is like these sort of portraits of these schools that are doing this work in an exemplary way are really helpful, but how do I sort of help my staff kind of get to this? Like, how do we sort of scaffold sort of a school community to move in that direction? And I didn't really feel like we had great answers to that question. Like we were sort of reporting in some ways on schools that had been doing this work for many years, and we didn't get to see the building process. And so, sort of by happenstance, I ended up hearing about an elementary school where that was working very, very methodically to do this work. And sort of what I was hearing about the school was this was a school where we're nurturing kids sort of, recognition of injustice and ability to think about injustice and challenge injustice was something that was being built into every grade level, every content area, every unit, and by every teacher. And so I ended up sort of visiting the school, and something that also was really appealing to me about this was that this wasn't it wasn't a school with extraordinary set of resources. It wasn't a school with some sort of special designation. It wasn't a magnet school. It was a traditional district elementary school in a large urban district, led by a school leader who was deeply committed to this work and invested in sort of doing the scaffolding to bring to make sure that every teacher felt comfortable, committed, and sort of able to do this work of helping kids kind of recognize, analyze, and challenge injustice. And so I sort of got excited about like this school sort of as a kind of as a model for what this work could look like, and reached out to Julia and Aaliyah and said, hey, would you collaborate with me on sort of trying to unpack what's happening here? And our book isn't solely about that single school, but that single school, which we call the Sarah Roberts Elementary School in the book, is sort of the centerpiece of the book. And it really was sort of grounded in this desire to share with school leaders in particular, how do you help staff like get ready, be ready, willing, and able to do the work of centering justice in a school, in the life of a school.
So you sort of came in earlier on into the life of Sarah Roberts Elementary and how it built this. So you saw and you researched along the way how they were able to provide, how they were able to build rather a school where, as you say, every teacher, every grade, every content area, and every unit involved learning about justice.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
We spent, so we had the opportunity to spend a year sort of embedded in the school, like sort of observing classes, talking to teachers, talking to students, talking to families, talking extensively to the school leader about help us understand like what's happening in here and how you got here.
And we're recording this during the first few months of 2026. Was it just a coincidence? Why now? Is it something you'd thought about for many years, or was the urgency heightened given the current situation that our country is in?
You can go.
No, you go ahead, Lee.
No, I was just
No.
going to say, I mean, I think like as Scott mentioned, we have been thinking about how do we develop young leaders to really think about and center justice and sort of advance justice in our society for over a decade. We think that that's fundamental, like that has been important for a long time. And so it wasn't planned for our book to come out at this exact moment, but we're glad that it did, because it's a really critical time for people to be thinking about how do we shepherd the next generation of leaders to help us get from where we are today to a fundamentally different place, a place where people have a kind of equal chance at life and opportunity across all different types of identity and life experiences. And so I think it was a happy accident, I think, that
or unhappy.
Yeah, unhappy. There you go. But we think it can be particularly useful for folks right now as they're navigating all of the different challenges that schools are navigating in this socio-political context.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's never more important, this particular goal of education. And when I read in your book, you reminded me of the quote by Nelson Mandela, who said, "Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world." And that has guided me. But just hearing it again, I'm wondering if one of you would like to share what that quote means to you. And I'll say it one more time for listeners. Nelson Mandela said, "Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world." Anyone want to speak to that?
Sure, I could jump in. Certainly in my background as a teacher and school leader, I've always believed in the lever of education as one of the most, if not the most powerful levers for equity. I think particularly in communities that serve students of color, that serve students who, immigrant populations, students who have historically been marginalized because of systemic barriers. Really believing in the intellectual identity and capacity of each and every student and recognizing the genius that is their legacy and is their identity, is a big part of my why as a teacher and a leader. And in my lived experience as a teacher and leader, when students feel that the educators in front of them see them, all of them, and recognize and value that genius as thinkers, as people, as community members, they will rise to that bar. And when they have that knowledge and skill, they can go out and do amazing and wonderful things. And we're frankly all dependent on all of them, right, to go and do those things for the betterment of our future, right? So this is about benefiting all of us, truly. And I have found as an educator in early childhood that very young children have a deep-seated understanding, like an innate understanding of fairness. And they want to talk about what is fair and what is unfair and why, and they want to feel empowered to do something about it.
Wow, I hadn't thought of it that way, Julia, that, when you say education is the most powerful weapon, it's really, it's the students and the future adult citizens, and that can change the adult's mindset, right? If you see our students as the most precious resource and the most powerful resource to change the world, then we're much more likely and inclined to invest everything in them and do it in the right way. Thanks for that. So again, as I said, one of the reasons I like this book is that it provides a much more systematic approach to educating students for justice. Like Scott said, right? You can point to this school or that school, but what are the ingredients, right? This book isn't meant for just one 8th grade history teacher to read and implement on her own, right? It's for a whole school approach. And the three of you really put together, I don't know if you'd call it a framework or 4 core principles to work with so that students become people of conscience, people who care about justice and equity and have the skills, the confidence, and the belief in themselves to make the world a better place. And so you share these 4 areas. I changed the order a little bit from your book, so excuse me, but I started with build adult capacity, right? You need the adult. One is build the adult capacity. A second core element is foster powerful partnerships. A third core element is to center justice in the curriculum and pedagogy. And a fourth is to engage students in social action. So I'm hoping here today we can go through each of these one at a time, starting with, and again, I'm sorry, I put this one first, building adult capacity. If one of you could speak to, first of all, what does that mean? What does it involve to build adult capacity when it comes to educating students for justice?
Thank you. And we also think of building adult capacity as in some ways the initial starting point of doing this work. We sort of moved it later in the book because we wanted readers actually to kind of be able to see what the other elements of the framework looked like, and then sort of the building adult capacity kind of is how do you get there. But we're happy to talk about that. And maybe in a moment, Julia, maybe I could sort of hand off to you to speak in more specifics. But I think I would just say when we talk about the idea of building adult capacity, something that I think many school leaders I suspect many school leaders would agree with me when I say, I feel like I can go into almost any school, anywhere in the country, and I'll find a few educators who feel very comfortable like working with their students around issues of injustice, talking, leading their students in discussions of injustice, sort of engaging their students in projects around challenging injustice. In some cases it might be a whole department, or it might be a particular content level team, but it's rarely the whole faculty, right? Like, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. Like we live in a society that has in some ways made conversations around injustice, whether it's racism or sexism or xenophobia, taboo, right? And so a lot of educators, and a lot of people, have questions about their ability and their sort of knowledge to engage their students in thinking and in teaching and learning about injustice. And so I think as a starting point, like for doing this work, like you need faculty, you need to sort of have a staff that feels, invested in doing this work, and then sort of confident about their ability to do the work. And that doesn't mean that they feel like they have every single answer to every single question, but sort of a willingness to engage in the work. And Julia, would it be okay to turn to you to sort of say a little bit about, like, from your perspective as a school leader, how do you sort of embark on this process of building adult capacity?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Scott. It's interesting as I'm sort of reflecting on the book. A lot of the things that we talk about in terms of building adult capacity are good or best practices for building adult capacity as educators, regardless of your focus, right? You need to have you want to build a community of learning amongst the adults, right? If I said the most valuable resource that we have in schools are the students, right? The adults are how we reach the students, that they are how we cultivate that thinking and that intellectual identity and that charge for justice. So thinking about how you build relational trust among adults, how you think about your professional development. A lot of times when I was a principal, people talked about the resource of time, and you never have enough time in schools. Teachers will tell you, I don't have enough prep time. We don't have enough meeting time. But in a lot of schools, I find that they use time poorly, right? And it's very easy to do because so much happens in schools. So being really intentional and strategic about when you bring groups of educators together, what is your purpose and what is your goal? And if you have a lens like criticality that you want to layer in, how do you do that systematically and coherently so that you don't end up with patches of practice, but you have this more coherent experience from classroom to classroom and grade to grade or content area? So thinking about, I like to talk about sort of arcs of learning, right? So over the course of the year, schools come up with improvement plans and they have priorities. And you shouldn't be in a place as a school where like, oh, it's October, what are we going to do this month, right? You should be super intentional about what assessments you're administering and what learning adults are doing and how that connects back to your goals and priorities as a school. And so that those structures for building that learning and thinking among adults is a really, really powerful way to layer in this lens of criticality or educating for justice.
And I'm with you, Julia, right? It's no different than any other professional learning that we would do. But like Scott says, right? So if we want people to imagine it. So in what might an activity or something that you might have staff engage in that would help build that type of capacity so that those teachers who don't initially either feel confident, competent, or actually have the skills to lead some of this work, what might an activity or a PD approach look like? Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Do you mind if I share a thought and then Julia turn it back to you? So I should say in the book, we offer 4 or 5 sort of different structures that we've seen different schools use to build adult capacity, but let me just sort of describe one of them. And so over, sort of a couple of years ago, I sort of got involved with a group of 5 middle schools who were interested in thinking about how to where they were interested in using a middle school advisory as a space for nurturing kids thinking about injustice. Like they sort of identified advisory as a place that might be that might fit within their sort of school day to do this work. And then the question is, well, how can we build adult capacity to do that? And so my team and I set up professional learning communities with each of those 5 in middle schools, like sort of one professional learning school community per school, and we met monthly. Like we sort of sat down monthly together with the goal of developing curriculum and sort of adapting curriculum that teachers could then bring into their advisory periods, like use with their kids, and then come back a month later and tell us all how it went, like, and what went well and what was challenging. And so we did that for an entire year. We would sort of like, my team and I would show up with some potential curriculum. The teachers would give us feedback, and as a group, we would make adjustments. They would go, work on it with their students, come back and tell us how it went. And I think, with regards to like the building adult capacity piece, I think there were a couple things happening there. Like, and so one thing is that, like, by working as a group, I think that we were sort of able to I think that teachers who might individually have felt less confident about their ability to kind of lead one of these lessons on their own felt like, oh, wait a minute, like this is a lesson that sort of like as a group we have developed that we are all doing with our middle school, with our respective middle school advisees. Like, and I think that sort of level of collaboration was both led to better lessons, by virtue of sort of just the wisdom of the crowd. And also, I think was psychologically reassuring to the participating teachers that I'm not doing this on my own. I'm not doing something that hasn't been sort of kind of worked on and sort of vetted by a group of adults, like a group of adults in the building. That's sort of something that we as a group are doing. And so that for me, that year-long sort of month by month by month sort of form of building adult capacity was felt pretty powerful. And I feel really pleased with the and I think the educators felt pleased with the curriculum that we sort of built over that period. And so that's just one example.
And what a powerful approach to professional learning, right? Build this
Yeah.
curriculum together. That that's in it. That's the work. That's not someone from the outside coming in. That's doing the work that will be applied there. Yeah, I'd love to see. I don't know if it's available. That middle school advisory curriculum around justice.
Yes.
I imagine many people could benefit from that.
Yes,
I'm going to move forward just because so we can hit all four areas. So yeah, so the first area is how do you build adult capacity around educating for justice. And then the second principle you have is to foster powerful partnerships. Can you first describe like with whom, like what kinds of partnerships are you talking about and how do you foster those partnerships?
Aaliyah, do you want to say a word or two about this one? No?
I think Julia is probably better positioned. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Just yeah. So I think that first and foremost, we need to center who we serve, right? And so families are their children's first and most important partners, and they have a lot of thoughts and ideas about what the learning experience should look like for their students, and creating structures, meaningful structures where you're not just informing families, these are the standards and this is what we're teaching, but actually recognizing their knowledge and insight into their students, their children, their communities, and what would be helpful to raise or shine the light on in your teaching, I think is really powerful. So we talk about some structures and vehicles to do that. I think also thinking really intentionally about community partners who might have some expertise in this work. That was a practice that we talked about in this book, and bringing them in, school leaders, and no matter how knowledgeable and skillful they are often not experts in this work. And so you have to sort of know where your expertise ends and when you can bring somebody in to complement and augment that work meaningfully. So that's another partnership that we highlight, that I think, again, where this kind of thing goes wrong is when you do one focus group with families and move on, or you bring in a guest speaker and they do a keynote speech and everybody feels great and then it's business as usual, right? So it's all about how you intentionally take that learning and that feedback through your arc of learning and layer and weave it in. And there has to be some built-in accountability for that. So we talk a little bit later about what that looks like in terms of curriculum and like what are some levers for doing that really methodically and intentionally. But I really want to emphasize the danger of sort of doing this tangentially or as a one-off or a box check, which I think is like where we see DEIJ initiatives go wrong in school, because it shouldn't be an initiative, right? It's not something we talk about once a month and then we move on. So those are just some examples that come top of mind.
Well, and I particularly like the idea of thinking of the parents and families as a partner, because we also often do family involvement as a one and done, right? Let's have one, career night, cultural night, whatever, as opposed to, you give the example in the book of I think it's a family engagement team where they would imagine the fifth grade team always bringing their unit ideas to this family engagement team and saying, do you see ways that we could add in certain elements or talk about justice or include some types of activities in the community or with knowledge of the community? It's a much more genuine way of involving families. The school doesn't have to have extra money like they might to pay a partner, and it's ongoing, and it's literally the families that the students are from, so they can talk about it at home, talk about it at school. Scott, did you want to add something about the powerful partnership piece?
I did have a thought, but Lilia, let me defer to you if there was, I don't know if you were going to jump
Yeah, I
in.
don't know if you were
Mhm.
going to go there, but I was just going to say, I think one of the other like reasons that this is such an important element of the book is that it also allows schools to like practice what justice work looks like in the world. And so the idea that like if we are actually going to get to a world where there is like justice for everybody, it is going to require, if we think historically about movements where there has been some actual change in the world around us, it has required people coming together in powerful partnerships. And so this idea of bringing families in terms of learning from their wisdom and really like creating powerful partnerships with them, and then also community partners, is also just modeling the practice of justice work in the context of schools. And I think that's really important as well.
I think
Practice
that's a
what you
great,
preach. Don't just tell the kids, but
Right.
actually show as the adults in the building, how are you coming together across difference and getting input. That's great.
yeah.
Scott, did you want to add something else about that?
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. And I would just sort of say in the book, like in terms of sort of some of the specifics we try to offer, I would just sort of just to give you a sense of kind of the almost like the different types of sort of practices that we're suggesting. On one hand, sort of at the most, sort of maybe resource intensive, one of the schools that we're talking about in the book sort of hired like kind of a justice coach in the same way you would hire a literacy coach to work with teachers to help them layer justice oriented content into their lessons, like in the same way that in the same way that like a literacy expert can help classroom teachers think about how to differentiate for the students in their room. This justice coach, this justice consultant, was doing the same with thinking about how to help educators feel confident about the work they were doing. That's of course like a more resource intensive version of a partnership. And then sort of at the middle level, kind of Jen, as you said, another school that we write about, like, sort of created a family engagement team that met regularly to give feedback to both, the school leader and the teachers on curriculum, practices, programming happening in the school. And I will say, like, I think an incredible thing that happened as a result of that family engagement team is when there were families in the school that had questions about some of the justice work happening, often it was members of the family engagement team who would engage those parents in sort of conversations about that. And I think parents getting to talk to other parents was very powerful sort of within the school context about, when one parent has a concern about, or a question even about, or wondering about sort of this justice work happening in school. I think it was very powerful when other parents were sort of explaining their perspective on why this work is important. And then just at the least sort of resource intensive level, another thing that we sort of talk about is that the Roberts Elementary School, the school that we're talking about, was just incredibly proactive about sort of communicating with parents about what was happening, like sort of saying, hey, like, Stand Against Racism Week is coming up in a few weeks. Like, this is what it's going to look like, sending in sort of the weekly, this is what it's going to look like. These are some of the activities that we're going to be doing. Here are some things you could do at home to, to kind of enrich the learning that your students are doing at school. And then kind of on the back end, here are some videos like with students presenting work that they, presenting their learnings, like to share with families. And so I think families felt very just incredibly in the loop about what this justice work looked like, which both I think enabled them to, as Aaliyah said, kind of to deeply enrich like the work that was happening, and also to feel like they fully understood sort of what was happening and why it was happening.
Well, and also by asking for their input on
Mhm.
units, you're also
Yeah,
letting them know this unit is coming up, right? So,
exactly,
so you
exactly.
do give the example, I think in Roberts Elementary School, of, a unit on Jackie Robinson. And you might have families have all kinds of resources, whether it's, oh, I have an old book on my shelf, or I am not, black and a baseball
Mm,
player, but I am the first Asian American woman ever to
mm,
work in this consulting firm, and maybe I
mhm.
could come in and talk about that, or whatever it is. So you're letting them know, and you're also sharing all kinds of resources that the teachers may not otherwise have. So,
Exactly.
all right, so you have these two elements here. We have building adult capacity for this justice work, and then you have fostering powerful partnerships, and then another area is centering justice in the actual curriculum and pedagogy. Does anybody want to explain a little bit about that?
Sure, I can jump in here. This is some work that I've engaged in as well as a leader, and we certainly studied very intensively in our book. We're in a time right now where there's a big push for high quality instructional materials. If you've read the TNCP research on the opportunity myth from 2018, where they talk about this idea that not all students have access to high quality, kids are getting great grades in many schools, but they're not all getting access to the same high quality tests, the same texts, tasks, and thinking, right? And that is a big contributor to why we see variability and achievement and growth amongst students. And so there's a push for that. And schools, teachers are not robots. So if you buy this beautiful packaged curriculum and you put it in front of a teacher, whether they're seasoned or their first year, and you don't build the conditions for teachers to what we describe as critically consume that curriculum and think about the thinking you are asking students to do, it's a recipe for disaster, right? Teachers go off course, their pacing is off, they're sort of missing the big ideas or the most salient and high leverage tasks. And so that is a structure that strong schools have, right? That I know certainly in the state of Massachusetts, there's a big push for that unit internalization work. And so one of the things that we explored is how can you, if you're creating the conditions for teachers to engage in thoughtful backwards design, even with the curriculum that has been vetted and endorsed and is appropriately standards aligned, and layer in identity and criticality alongside the intellectualism and skills. And I'm very much, quoting Dr. Goldie Muhammad's work. She talks about this as a framework for thinking about where opportunities to engage in this thinking and discourse for students emerges naturally, right? So we're not asking people to throw out curriculum and create their own units, although you can certainly do that, right? But instead to think really thoughtfully about the text that you're using. So the Jackie Robinson unit is in expeditionary learning, right? That's a vetted curriculum that many districts across the country use. That text is chosen. If your teachers are going to teach it, like what an opportunity to help them think about the essential questions and the tasks that students are grappling with and how to make some smart choices, which teachers do every single day. No matter what they teach, no matter where they teach, they are making choices. There's a limited amount of time you have in front of kids and a range of learners in every classroom in this country, right? So teaching them how to make smart choices in a coherent and aligned way that center who they teach and the natural opportunities to get kids to think critically about inequities and levers to change and disrupt, which kids are very, very eager to do. So I think systematizing that, which Scott sort of talked about at the beginning, so that in every grade, in every classroom, teachers are using a similar lens and having similar conversations together. And when they're doing that, like that collective expertise of the educators builds and creates more coherent experiences for students. So I think we are fools. I know there's a lot of language out there now about regulating curriculum. I think we are fools and naive to think that we can ever fully regulate what happens in a classroom between an adult and a child, nor do we want adults to stand in front of students and read scripts. We do not. We want teachers who think. And we have a responsibility to create the conditions for them to think about who they serve and how they serve them.
I want to highlight something you said and then give an example from your book, that you're not asking schools and teachers to throw out curriculum. You're asking them to think about how to enhance it and to highlight justice work. And so you gave an example of like a unit on Jackie Robinson, which I'm sure many people are nodding their heads. They have a unit on that, across the US. And so previously, where an assignment might have been what factors were most important to Jackie Robinson in leading social change, right? That might have been an essay, a diorama, whatever, students explore that in the Roberts Elementary School, they slightly tweak that to, given what have you learned about Jackie Robinson, what's an effective recipe for a social change leader? So how can we take these lessons and apply them, not just put them in this box of what happened in the past, but what are the elements, almost like Scott was asked by principals, like what are the elements of creating a school like this? So I think that's really important. It's a way to look through your current units that you're already teaching. And also, just like you said, Julia, teachers are not robots, right? All of us in this, we've all been teachers. We wouldn't be in this field if we were treated like robots. But as a school leader, you do want some type of tools to get all of your teachers on board. And so you make a suggestion of a unit plan template, right? So many of us who've worked with unit plan templates might have questions like, what's the essential question? What vocabulary? What resources? So you might also have, a social justice question just to remind teachers as the fifth grade team or the math department, they're getting together to plan their next unit, how might you weave in justice into this unit? So I thought that, yeah, good.
No,
Aaliyah.
just what you made me think of something. I wonder if I can build on that, because I think one of the important things we're trying to remind people in this part of the book is that you can really take a justice lens with any content. And so even as we think about this moment, as people are experiencing kinds of restrictions around curricula and content, it can feel like, well, how could I actually help students recognize and analyze and challenge injustice while this content is being taken away from me? But I think what we're trying to say in the book is, like, with anything, no matter what, you can add or layer this kind of justice lens. I had an example of a principal from a school that I talked to last week where they have a school-wide essential question. So, for example, this month, their question is, who or what has power and how is it acquired or revoked? And across every subject, like science, math, ELA, everybody has to think about how the content they have to teach that this particular month can help students think about this question of who or what has power and how can it be how is it acquired or revoked. And so I think we're trying to remind folks that, like, we have a lot of power within our curriculum to build these skills of recognizing and analyzing and challenging injustice with students, even across content and even with different kinds of restrictions.
And I love that line, quote from you. You just said you can take a justice lens with any content, right? And that sort of brings together these three pieces, right? So how do we build adult capacity so they can see and discuss the justice lens in any content, right? How do we bring in partners so maybe they could share some ideas and an outside perspective, right? I'm so stuck in my 8th grade math curriculum. I would say, I can't weave justice. It's math. It's my quadratic equations, right? So to have some outside view. And then actually, as you start to build a curriculum where, yes, this is maybe what we do in April, or this is in this particular unit, how we weave in the justice lens. So thank you, Aaliyah, for that observation. I want to get to the fourth area, that engaging students in social action, because, good teaching is getting our kids to be excited about the content, engage, and feel that this matters outside of, the four walls of my classroom. And that's exactly what social action is. So it dovetails nicely with effective pedagogy and education. So what does it look like to engage students in social action? What does that mean? And I don't know if you could give an example. What might it look like for my 2nd grade students or my 11th grade AP history students? Anyone want to take that? Yeah, go ahead, Scott. Yeah.
Sure. And thank you for that question. And so I think as a starting point, I think we would say that one of the things that we believe, like, sort of based on the research and the scholarship in this area, is that when you're engaging kids in sort of learning about injustice, it's really important to pair opportunities to learn about injustice with opportunities to resist and challenge injustice. Like, and if you don't do that, like, if a school, or for that matter, a family, like, or an organization is entirely focused on the learning about injustice, like, that can lead to kids feeling overwhelmed, right? Like, and discouraged by the sheer amount of injustice in the world that we live in. And so like, that learning about injustice needs to be paired with opportunities to do something about it. Like, and that doesn't mean sort of solve the problem, like, for once and for all. Like, these are big, complex challenges, but it does mean to sort of to play a role in addressing the problem. And so to your question about sort of what might that look like, that can, sort of like all of the things in our book, like, that can look like things very big and things very small. And so to start sort of on the maybe on the sort of the more manageable seeming end, one of the 3rd grade classes that we were looking at the Roberts Elementary School, they were doing a unit on persuasive writing, which was very much part of the mandated curriculum, Common Core aligned standards, and so on and so forth, and the students were learning the tenets of persuasive writing. the teachers decided to sort of bring into that unit on persuasive writing some learning about Native American mascots. Like in the state that the Roberts Elementary School sits, there's still still more than 40 communities, 40 sort of high schools in the state that that still have Native American mascots as their as their school nickname, and in some cases, those are explicitly sort of racial slurs. And the students did some reading like about sort of the use of Native American mascots, like in sports. Like they did they did even like pieces of social science reading about the impact of those mascots on Native American children. Like they did some reading about how a few years ago, like I think the Cherokee Nation requested that Jeep Cherokees refrain from using the term Cherokee within to sell a product. And then sort of as the culmination of the persuasive writing unit, the students were tasked with writing a persuasive letter to one of the school committees in their state, expressing their own opinion on the use of a Native American mascot in that community, and sort of and the students were absolutely free to make the argument to the school committee that you should stop doing this, or that you should keep doing this. Like this was that was for the students to critically decide on their own, and to use evidence to sort of to support the argument they were making in the letters. And those were letters that the teachers then sent off to those school committees. And what was fascinating for us, like sort of as researchers, is to see how empowered the students felt like by that experience, by sort of writing a real letter that went in the mail, that was directed to a real person, about a real adult problem. And I think that in some ways, like the addendum to that story is that none of the school committees wrote back to the students. And so you might say to yourself, like, oh, like what a maybe that's like, is that a discouraging experience? Like, but I think the short answer was like, I think from the start the answer was no, because it felt to the students like they were doing something real and addressing something real. But then, right, a couple months after this assignment, the state legislature in this state took up a bill considering the banning of Native American mascots, like in communities across the state. And I think the students sort of once again sort of had this opportunity to feel like, oh, like we are learning and engaging with a topic that adults are engaging with as well. And so I think that even though there wasn't sort of this direct point A to point B, oh, the students did this and it resulted in this, the students felt very efficacious about being in the mix on a topic that was sort of a politically relevant topic within their community. And so that's an example of engaging in social action that didn't require, that was absolutely sort of consonant with the curriculum, the mandated curriculum that the students were doing. And and to your point, Jen, from a few months ago, it just required the adult capacity to layer in that work, like a feeling of sort of support, like that the faculty were going to be doing this together, family and parent engagement, around what is this persuasive writing and what is the point of it, like, and and so you can see how sort of all the pieces start to fit together.
Yeah, and I bet you those third graders learned more effectively how to write a persuasive essay, right? Because in the past, when people have picked, all right, write a persuasive essay about whether Snickers or Twix bars are better, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no real heart in that. They don't really care about that. It's not real. No one's reading it. This is an opportunity to give a real audience and a real chance for impact. And, oh, this is why I need to learn to write persuasively, right? No one in the real, I guess, advertising, if you're writing persuasively about Snickers bars, but, this is a real opportunity. And it's all around, and kids do have opinions from an early age. You give another example in the book of a high school social studies teacher having kids look through the school handbook, right? How many of us as teachers have droned through the school handbook at the beginning of the year in advisory or our own precious class time, but instead, have students identify the rules or policies they don't agree with, they think are unfair, are unjust, and then, decide on a policy to work toward changing, write something persuasive, that is so much more real. That's a real authentic task. And I hate to bring AI into everything, but we need kids to think more critically about a whole bunch of things. things
Mhm.
that they read and learn about. And I think this fosters that ability as well.
I just want to add to that too, because I think like Scott was saying a little bit more about like why this piece is so important in terms of like students not necessarily feeling overwhelmed or helpless about all of the levels of injustice that are in the world. But to your point, like we need students or young people who can critically think, but we also need young people who can do, right? Like who are not just like watching and spectating or analyzing the injustice, but who are willing to get in there and say, like, what are the actions I can take to remedy this, to change this? And so that practice piece is really like fundamental to getting to the point, like to getting towards justice. It's sort of like this academic, but really like necessary step to actually seeing a more just world.
Yeah, and to your point, not just talking about what you can do, but
Right.
doing it, learning by doing, let's go all the way back to Dewey in this type of learning. Did you want to
Yeah.
add something, Julia? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that I hear a lot. I mean, part of my job is to be in classrooms every day, standing next to teachers with students learning and thinking about their learning and thinking. And I often hear comments about student disengagement and student passivity, right? And so, like in the same way that it's important to engage families because they have investment, right? And who we're educating, students want to talk about and think about things that are relevant to their lives. And they don't just want to be passive observers. But if the content they're learning about feels like a Snickers bar conversation, like they disengage pretty quickly and they let you know that it's not subtle when they're checked out, right? Especially in the world that we live in when there's so many other competing factors in front of and around kids all the time. So when you can take curriculum and you can think about like these are great books and these are great ideas, but my kids will care a lot more about it if it feels immediately relevant to their community, their context. How can I make some intentional adjustments? You get more investment. You get kids that are better critical thinkers. You also get kids that are better writers, better readers, right? That can, to Aaliyah's point, then do something because they have those skills.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate this approach to everything, to raising students' awareness, encouraging them, supporting them to act, and also just really bringing the whole school together to build adult capacity, foster powerful relationships and partnerships, center justice in the curriculum and the pedagogy, and then finally engaging students in this type of social action. So I'd like to leave people with a lightning round because it's a lot. We just talked about a lot of things with one main idea of your book, one high leverage action that a leader can take, because this seems like a lot, where to start, and one resource. So if we could have Aaliyah, would you share sort of an overall main idea of the book that people can take with them?
Yeah, maybe I'll just summarize kind of where you started there, but saying that I think the overall idea of the book, the main idea is that we have the power and the responsibility as educators to ensure that our next generation of adults, the young people in our classrooms right now, have the skills to recognize, analyze, and challenge injustice, and that we can do that in every classroom, in every content, and across schools. Um, and that school leaders can set the vision for the work, they can develop teachers to integrate the skills for critical consciousness, they can partner with families, and they can give students the chance to act towards injustice so that we can eventually live in a more humane and just world.
Thank you for leaving us with that. And Julia, one high leverage action leaders can take or a place to start?
Yeah, I think in a time when leaders and teachers feel like maybe more and more control is being taken from them, I want to go back to the point I made about the resource of time, right? And so leaders and teachers can think really intentionally about how they organize their time for meaningful learning and provide that lens or framework so that there's coherence across that time, so that what teachers are doing in their professional development connects to what they're doing in collaborative planning, connects to what is happening in the classroom, connects to the coaching and feedback they're doing. So if you're using that time really well, it makes it easier to layer in that lens of criticality and identity. And when you're not, and it's very fragmented and one-offs, that's where you run into problems.
Yeah, I'm hearing the importance of coherence, and teachers feel that
Parents,
too if you're all over the place with your
they sure
initiatives.
do. And their confidence grows when they get, just like kids, the same message. I've seen this tool before. I've had this conversation before. I heard this last week in this meeting. Now I'm right. So it's like that layering.
Wonderful. And Scott, you want to end us with a resource in addition to your book that you suggest for people who want to learn more? Oh, you're on mute, Scott. Just unmute first.
Sorry about that. If you don't mind too, super quick, like one, I would just say,
Yeah.
Goldie Mohammed's book, Cultivating Genius, is a book that we really saw, some of the schools that we write about in our book using as a framework for bringing justice content into their unit planning and into their teaching. And in the book, like Goldie Mohammed just does a really nice job of sort of arguing that every curriculum unit should be nurturing kids' skills and intellect, but also their identity and criticality, like their ability to kind of think critically about issues of injustice. And so we watch schools, really thoughtfully build adult capacity to bring that framework into their planning and then into their teaching, and into their work with kids. And then sort of briefly, just because I mentioned at the beginning, and you were kind enough to ask about it, that middle school project that I was engaged with some other colleagues of ours did result in this curriculum that sort of has a whole bunch of lessons for engaging kids and learning about justice and injustice in middle school advisory specifically. And so I, maybe if there's a way I can leave with you sort of, and we sort of put all those lessons and all those materials on a website, like for any middle school educator to, and any educator, to utilize. And so maybe I can give you the URL for, for interested
Will
folks.
do. Yes. I was going to ask, how can people learn more about your work? So would you like to start with that? Yeah.
Yeah. So you can just go, it's just bc.b, I teach at Boston College, bc.edu/4Cs, like the number 4, the letter C, the letter S, like which stands for, civic character and critical consciousness in advisory. And so bc.edu/4Cs, and it'll bring up, all the work that we did over that year.
Great. And anything else, any other way for people to learn more about you all and your work?
I think we have a few other pieces that folks
Mhm.
can check out. We have a critical consciousness and it being a key to student achievement. It's like 3 pages long. We have another article about not teaching your students to be passive observers of social injustice. It's probably a 6-minute read. That's on the ASCD website, I believe. So those might be really just like quick, easy ways for people who are in schools all day to read more and learn more about our work in addition to the book.
I can link those in the show notes if you send those
Thank
links to me. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to all of you, Julia, Scott, Aaliyah, for spending the time to talk to me and everybody about this important topic. For those listening, thank you for taking the time as well. I know how busy you are. So if you got something out of this conversation, please share the podcast and these resources with a colleague. I will be back in 2 weeks. And until then, learn more and lead better.